Time for the third part of texturing. So we just did the wheels and all ambient occlusion is baked, and what we're going to do now is the biggest and probably most difficult texture of all, which is the chassis and engine. Like I said, I prefer not to postpone the most difficult parts until the end, so I'm just going to tackle it right away. So I start off again with setting up my PSD with some layer folders, and I'm going to render the UV template right away. I'm rendering this in black and white. Doesn't really matter the color, I mean, it's just a small guide. I tend to use the ambient occlusion as a more important guide than I do with the actual texture shells. I only use the texture shells when I want to see the exact boundary of something. The ambient occlusion is just a much better way to start your textures. So if you don't bake ambient occlusion yet, then you really should start doing that. Okay, so here's my ambient occlusion, and I'm setting it to multiply, reducing opacity on my UV template overlay, and I'm creating a new layer in my diffuse folder. I've created a gray one for the gray metal, and one thing I know for sure is from one of the reference pictures I saw, I want to have some parts of the car red. Which parts are those? Well, it'll be the rear axle and the rear differential. I think it'll look more interesting. I know I was hating a little bit on the red wheels, but those are a lot more visible. I think the red differential will look pretty good. So now, this is me selecting some parts. I know these are the parts for the rear differential. You might not be able to tell, but I've worked a lot with this model, so I know. So I'm creating a new layer with a mask, filling that with red. And just a little note about what I'm doing here. Once I have the ambient occlusion and the normals, I start filling in the base colors. Just solid colors that I fill in, which will work together with the ambient occlusion. And that by itself can look okay already. For example, games like Team Fortress, some models, I've checked them, this is basically all they do. Ambient occlusion and a solid color, and sometimes some sort of paint strokes on it. So I performed a sponge, and what I did here is, maybe rewind to have another look, is I did edit and then fade, and fades the previously performed action. So I'm doing a noise, edit, fade noise, turn it down to 2%, and well, I'm picking 10. 5, yeah, hit OK. And the advantage is it saves you the effort from creating a new layer and then blending that layer's opacity, then changing the opacity down and then merging it down. It's just much easier to do it with a single operation. So anyway, I just made that metal a little bit more interesting by adding sponge and noise. Just a tip from me: if I do metal surfaces or almost any type of surface that I texture from scratch, I always use sponge and noise, and I always fade them down to make their effect more subtle. So one of the most important tips I can give for starting texture from scratch. I know it's really hard to see on this compressed video. Once again, I will try and post the texture sheets together with this tutorial so you can have a look at it. Not the PSDs, just JPEGs. So I'm splitting off some solid parts to separate layers. For example, the fuel tank, I want to have a little bit more of a beige color, and for the exhaust I want to have a little bit more of a blue color. So I'm just creating separate layers for them. You don't want to keep everything the same tint of gray. Also, not too much variation, or things could get too noisy in terms of visual noise. But it's best to keep some variation. For example, I think I should change the color for the frame also. So there we go, dark metal color, and want to have those parts as dark metal. Something like that. Yeah, that looks cool. I'm now just looking for some extra parts which I could turn into this dark metal. Yeah, now I just selected the brakes, just to see which parts are where. I don't know about all these tiny parts, what they are. And the actual calipers, they have to be dark metal. And let's see, what else could I turn into dark metal here? Just thinking what would look interesting as a different color. Actually, I think that's okay, so I'll just go for a medium dark now. Not too dark, just a different tint. And the leaf springs, I'll turn those into a sort of medium dark color with a little bit of a beige tint in there. There we go, that looks cool. And I think I'll make the frame also medium dark. That'll look good. And for some reason Photoshop just keeps messing up my layout. I keep saving that, I keep changing it, it always forgets it, so that's why I changed it back. I never use the color picker, I always use history and actions at the top, layers and channels at the bottom right. So I'm still looking for solid colors that I should split up. I want to do this sort of base layout first before I go in and tackle each part separately. So I'm just going to save this as a PSD already. Now save it as a TGA, just to have a look at what it looks like on my model. So I was still using the Ambient Occlusion map. There we go. You can see the red axle. I like the color differences at the front there. That also looks pretty good. And my exhausts are looking pretty nice also. And I want to change the unwrapping a little bit here. These insides of the exhausts, apparently I forgot to unwrap them, which is totally not a problem because they have to be pitch black anyway. So I'm just gonna make them really tiny and dump them dump them in some dark corner. Also, I seem to have forgotten the smoothing groups on some of these. And I might not even have showed you that in the videos. Maybe I just missed recording that, but I actually capped those insides of the exhaust and the low poly. Okay, so now for just my basic metal, which will be on most parts, like the engine, I'm just adding another noise. And changing it to overlay, reducing opacity, just so it's subtle. And apparently this video's compression is a little bit worse than others. I think it has something to do with me switching to a new version of Camtasia. I'll try to look into that. But yeah, just try to listen to what I'm saying instead of trying to look for details that you won't see with this current compression. So I'm zooming in a little, checking out what my changes look like. I'm looking for some more parts to maybe... Yeah, and of course I'm creating my special overlays layer. And this is something I really like doing a lot. Painting in some highlights. You know, with everything next gen you shouldn't paint too much lighting. Only the really general stuff like ambient occlusion. But still I prefer to paint in some really soft specular highlights. Like I'm doing here. For example, the gas tank, the part that's facing upwards and to the back. Painting just a really big blurry highlight there. I'm just looking for the places that are obviously round and that will really like catch a specular, have an obvious specular. I'm just painting some slight highlights on those. The ambient occlusion helps you figure out where that exactly is. I mean, without, I'd have a hard time finding these places. So I'm just using a really blurry brush here. I set my flow to 20%, and I'm doing this on a new layer, which is just set to normal and an opacity of 100%. I might change that later. And basically, this isn't technically difficult. You just have to think about what places will benefit from this. I'm even doing it for like the, yeah, to reduce my flow even more. The smaller highlights, there we go, that's better. In places like, you have to keep it subtle sometimes. And this is just going to help make my texture pop out more, make my normal show a little bit more. You could take this really far, and but I'm not really after that. I'm just doing it on some general areas. You can do it for every tiny detail with a 1 pixel brush, but really, meh, I'm not going to do that. Also, I didn't do this for the wheels. Why? Well, obviously because the wheels are supposed to rotate, and you don't want to have any lighting painted into them other than the ambient occlusion. And then still you want to keep the ambient occlusion sort of general, so the rotations will work. So the edges of my my spikes at the front. I think I want to do it on the exhausts also, but maybe I'll do that in a separate color. Those edges of the engine are really going to benefit from that. Yeah, I can't forget I duplicated that part twice. It's unwrapped uniquely because of the text that that is on it. So I pick a slight blue here and paint on my exhaust. And you know, if you're not too familiar with unwrapping this type of shapes, I hope you can see that when doing this sort of stuff, you should be really glad that you didn't unwrap these as some crazy bent shape. Because I unwrap the exhaust as straight parts, it's just a lot easier to paint the that sort of highlights on them. Again, probably a little bit hard to see these things in the video, but believe me, they do make a difference when you're viewing this in actual real time in 3D Studio Max or any viewer. Yeah, just a remark in this video also, these are texturing tutorials. You don't need 3D Studio Max for this. You can use anything like Marmoset. I believe Racer 445 does that. You can use Maya with high quality preview. It doesn't matter. These are texturing tutorials. You just need Adobe Photoshop. So I'm just selecting some more parts for color differences. Those suspension brackets, I want them to be a darker color. Yeah, and if you're color picking, never color pick with your ambient occlusion on, because the ambient occlusion will actually modify the values, so you might end up picking different colors than your actual base color is. I just turn it off, pick the color, turn ambient occlusion back on. And one thing I want to do here on my fuel tank is I have these sort of bands on them to hold it into place. They obviously need to have a different color, so I need to do that in the diffuse also, and that's why I turned on the normal map just to see where exactly they were sitting. And I'm duplicating them to a separate layer because I want to do an outer glow on them to get this sort of fake ambient occlusion type of effect at their edges. So they seem to cast a little bit of a shadow This is one disadvantage. I wouldn't call it a disadvantage. It's just a minor inconvenience when you render your ambient occlusion with Vray and normal maps, is that it doesn't pick up this sort of stuff. If I would have baked it from my high poly, it probably would have been in there, but then again, I wouldn't have had the control about how strong it should have been exactly. So, and I'm using the same layer styles. You know, some people that are into Photoshop will be all like, ugh, layer styles are horrible, never use them. No, they can be really, really handy. I tend to use outer glow a lot, inner glow. Sometimes I use bevel and emboss, but they're really cool for adding fake shadows, fake highlights, whatever. So I'm going to save that again, have a look. Yeah, see, that looks pretty good. It really looks like those strips, those bands around the fuel tank are 3D and not just a fake normal map effect. So just looking around and try to summarize it for you again. Just how I go at these really complex textures. First I go for solid colors, and first I go for ambient occlusion, then I go for solid colors, and then I start doing this stuff like adding the highlights and making the texture with just solid colors and fake lighting information interesting enough. Now that I've done that, I am going to start adding some dirt. And I've created a new layer folder in my diffuse folder. I create lots of subfolders because this PSD file, I'll tell you right away, is going to be a huge layer fest. I'm going to have tons of layers in here because it's a complex, big texture with lots of detail. So I have my dirt overlays texture. I'm using the E3D brushes again, really cool. Just to paint some general cloudy, noisy dirt on my texture. And I'm mainly going at it on the engine at the moment because the engine will probably be one of the most dirty parts of the car. I mean, there's oil there, there's dirt, the engine is completely exposed. And I don't want to overdo it, I don't want to make this a rusty, smudgy clunker, but it still has to be visually interesting, so I'm just going to add some dirt anyway. So try to pay attention at how I'm trying to keep this subtle. I'm painting with a flow of 32%. And my layer is still set to 100% opacity, but I might change that. I'm also just looking at the areas that are more occluded in the ambient occlusion map because, as I've mentioned before, they tend to have more dirt than other areas. And this could take a while. I mean, if you want to do it everywhere, especially in a complex texture like this, you're going to have to put some time in it. Bottom of the engine will probably be dirtier than other parts. I'm changing the brush size now and then, just depending on where exactly I'm painting. Also, once again, this is done using a graphics tablet for my computer. I'm using an Intuos 3A5. Definitely recommended that you get a tablet if you want to do this sort of work seriously. I'll go as far as saying that pretty much impossible to get the same level of quality if you do this with a mouse. Not to say there aren't any exceptions, but really, don't be hard on yourself. So just the spots where objects tend to meet, they also tend to have more dirt. I turned the flow down and increased the brush size just to add some bigger dirt on there. I want to break up surfaces. I want to start to get rid of that solid color feel and just get some subtle noise variation in there. Turning up the flow again because it was a little bit too low for these dirty areas. Also, the frame is probably going to be one of the most worn parts since it really sits at the bottom. Rocks hit it, water drips down it. Frame will probably see the most abuse, so I'll put the most dirt eventually on there. Not right now, but I'm going to do lots of layers. You can probably tell by me creating a layer group. That means I'm going to have like, I don't know, 5, 4, maybe higher. I don't know yet. So I changed the size of my brush just depending on where I'm painting. changing the flow depending on if I want to break up big surfaces or if I want to paint dirt in corners. And another reason for adding this dirt, just apart from visual interest, is just making objects look more attached to each other, making it more logical that they are attached. Ambient occlusion help, but dirt is like another step on top of that. And I'm just setting it to 100% self-illumination here. You'll notice that I have some lights around there. And yeah, I know I didn't explain the light settings and the shader settings before. Well, you can see me change the shader, but I'll do a separate video about that in the end. It's no big deal anyway. 2 omnis with different colors and intensities, and a few settings in the shader. Right now I'm looking at my texture with 100% self-illumination. The reason for that is because then I can see much more how well my texture is holding up without any fancy shader effects. It's just pure texture being returned here. I just remembered something else. The carburetors at the top of the engine, they tend to have this gold-like tint, and I want to get that goldish tint in there also. It's sort of warm beige, orangey, yellowish tint. Just because I think it's going to look cool. So I'm picking a brush here, and I'm not going to do it everywhere. I'm just going to not fill them. I'm not going to fill them with solid gold. I'm going to paint some parts of them in this gold color. So you can see I turned on the UV template. That's because I found it a little bit hard to tell what was what exactly here, since that isn't exactly the cleanest part of my ambient occlusion. So yeah, I'm just going to paint more of it gold because it'll look cooler. Save it as a TGA and just have a look at. That looks a little bit too faint. I want more saturation, it has to be darker, so reduce brightness and boost contrast, and that looks a lot more bronzed. Yeah, that's better. And you can see it looks more interesting just because I picked a different color here. And I don't want to have those yeah, there we go, that's better. Apparently I mirrored that part. Whatever. I forgot some parts. So this is just really simple brushing it in with a solid color to make it look interesting. Checking it from all angles. Okay. And now that I've done that, I want to paint in some small fake highlights on these carbs, just because it's going to look better if I do that. So I just picked a lighter, brighter color of the standard gold I was working with, and I'm also painting in some fake shadows with a more saturated, darker tint, and just some really picking the right colors. Oh yeah, this is a little trick I like doing also. I duplicate my ambient occlusion layer, and I set that to color burn, and set the color burn to opacity of 30, and set the actual ambient occlusion to an opacity of 70. So the total adds up to 100%. As you can see, what the color burn does is in the shadow areas of the ambient occlusion, it tends to make the colors, it tends to burn them, make them a little bit darker, change the hues a little bit, and I think that looks interesting personally. So it's something I've been experimenting with a little bit. And just a remark, my shader can do that in real time for actual shadows too. Not on the textures, you have to do it yourself on the textures, but it can do it for the shadows and the shading that lights actually cast. So there we go. That's looking pretty cool. Okay, so one thing I want to do also is I want to get the colors right for the text. So I turned off my bottom colors. I'm just manually gonna paint the paint over the logo there, the text. Not so sure if it's a good idea to paint this manually. It might look a little bit blurry. We'll see what it ends up looking as once I've done all of them. Well, all of them. I'm just going to do one and copy the other one. Yeah, now I picked the pencil tool with which is a 1 pixel, very hard brush, and I'm just using that to tighten things up a little bit. Make it less blurry and more defined. Set my brush to 1 pixel. Once again, this would be much easier if I would have kept the actual font layer and not collapsed it into my normal map. But yeah. And here actually I'm deciding that maybe I should try it anyway. So I'm picking my font again, which is available in both Photoshop as 3D Studio Max, which is a really nice thing. And I'm trying to look for the right proportion, because I just figured out that the painting it's not going to work. And so what I need to do now is try and match it to the exact position of it's a little bit skewed. Scale it a little bit, and that seems to sit almost right. Maybe I have to scale it a little bit more. Yeah, okay, I think that looks about right. So I duplicate it, copy it up there. Strange, it has a slight offset, but whatever. And turn on my base colors. Save it as a TGA again. There we go. Hemi 540 has appeared on my engine. If you put it in both normal as diffuse, it's just gonna pop out more and look more interesting. And yeah, what I'm going to do now is paint some highlights on those ridges on the valve covers, just so that they stand out more. You have to make sure your diffuse and your normal map communicate properly, that they highlight the same type of areas, that you don't forget to highlight some stuff, change the colors, just so it pops out more. You created those details, so make them pop. And of course I'm going to do a small fakey outer glow around them to fake the ambient occlusion. And that looks about right. Might want to focus on a slightly different area. Yeah, one little thing that I forgot is those really cool blower valves that open when you really rev the gas a lot. I want them to have a different color. I want them to be red so they really stand out. That's one of the things I really wanted in this engine. Like really brightly colored standout valve blower valves. Oh, and I caught the wrong part here. I'm trying to find out which one it is. For that, I need to go into the textures. I want to find out what the sides of those little valves are. And apparently, it's a line below it. It's not really visible. Okay, look at that, it's really cool that it's red, it just stands out. And why am I picking red? Because that's because I want to make the hot rod body have at least some red in it. I want red to be like the main focus color of this car. You can use green, you can use yellow, whatever. Just make sure to pick a cool color. Also, never go for the full on 100% red type of red. You know, RGB 100, or never go for those extreme values. Always go for something a little bit darker, a little bit less saturated, something in between. Oh yeah, now since this is also part of my general solid color type of thing, I'm looking for what a drive belt would look like in terms of texture. Not really finding anything. This looks like useless stuff. So I'm going to CG textures and checking if the man-made section might have any type of rubber belts. Not straight away. Maybe in heavy machines. Not really finding anything there. Okay, so what I'm going to try is I want to use a pattern, and I have some patterns predefined, which I got from a website. It's a techie pattern set, and it has these really cool pixel-sized patterns, and these are absolutely great for adding this type of detail. See, they have these diagonal lines, all these little dots. They're great for creating these pixel perfect small little patterns. Look at that! Look how cool that looks. So you just create a pattern layer and adjust the opacity a little bit. One downside is you can't really rescale these because they're made at pixel perfect scale. But good thing is that pack. Actually, I forgot where I got it, but you should be able to find it if you look for Tech Pattern Pack Photoshop on Google. That's the way I found it. The pack has a lot of different scales in it. So my base layout for my texture, I've made the start for it. This took me about an hour in real time. Let's see if I can do a little bit more. But we still have a long way to go on this texture. I'm going to create a new dirt overlay, and I'm going to call it speckle dirt. And I'm going to pick some sort of speckle type of brush. These don't look too good. I don't want them to have different colors. Man, I need to find something good here. Yeah, this is okay. I want some small speckles. Set the size a little bit smaller. And reduce scattering and count. Always change brushes if you don't feel they do exactly what you want. I mean, it doesn't hurt to change them. I do it all the time. Sometimes I just create a custom brush when I need it. Not that that's such a big deal, but you might not think about that. Some people might rely entirely on brushes that they download, and it might not even cross their mind that you can actually adjust them. So please do so. Sometimes I've created really specific brushes. Like once I had to paint barnacles on a ship's hull, so I created a brush that scattered barnacles in the texture, which worked pretty well. So painting some more of these speckles, try to put them in logical places. I want to have different scales and types of grunge and noise on there. I want to have the blurry, cloudy noise, then I have the small pixel scale speckles. I'm putting a bit more than I would on other parts on this the chassis here. Like I said, it's going to be probably be the dirtiest part. Just painting some of this noise around. I'll remark that I already consider this like the next big step of texturing when you go on to detailing past the solid colors. I didn't keep everything in these videos split up so logically, but we'll continue on this in the next video. But you can just see I'm starting to do the different scales and types of dirt, like I did on the tires also. The tires had different sizes and types of dirt on them. So I'm going to save that again and check out what it looks like. Hard to see again here. I might have to erase some of them on the more visible parts. Okay. Alright. Turn on off self-illumination. Look at that. It looks a lot better already. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that, and see you in the next video.